The rain poured down in thick, heavy sheets, drenching the city in a cold, relentless storm. The streets shimmered with reflections of neon lights, casting eerie glows on the wet pavement. Cars rushed by, their tires splashing through puddles, but no one stopped. No one noticed the small figure huddled near the side of the road, his thin arms wrapped around his frail body. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt, and his eyes, wide, hollow, desperate, searched the passing faces for a trace of kindness. But there was none. People walked past him without a second glance, their umbrellas shielding them not just from the rain, but from the reality they didn't want to see. The world was always in a hurry. No one had time for a boy who had been discarded, left to fend for himself in a world that had already decided he didn't matter. Until one man stopped. A sleek black car rolled to a gentle halt at the curb, its tinted window lowering just enough for a pair of sharp, inquisitive eyes to take in the sight before them. The man inside was well-dressed, his suit impeccable, his watch gleaming under the faint glow of the streetlights. He had built his empire from nothing, climbing his way to the top with ruthless determination. Money, power, influence, he had everything. And yet, something about the boy in the rain made him pause. He stepped out of the car, the cold wind biting at his skin as he approached. The boy shrank back instinctively, his body tense, as if expecting a harsh word or a cruel shove. But the man simply knelt beside him, his voice low and steady. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, his small hands gripping his tattered sleeves. The man studied him for a moment before taking off his expensive coat and draping it gently over the boy's trembling shoulders. The warmth of the fabric made the child's eyes flicker with something unfamiliar, hope. "Come with me," the man said. It wasn't a question. It was a decision. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had chosen him. The ride back to the man's house was silent, the boy curled up in the plush leather seat, still too afraid to believe this wasn't some cruel trick. But when they arrived, he was met with warmth, literally and figuratively. The mansion was grand, its walls lined with art and luxury. But it wasn't the wealth that caught the boy's attention. It was the kindness. A hot meal was placed in front of him, the steam curling up in delicate swirls. He hesitated at first, his stomach clenching in confusion. He had forgotten what real food smelled like, what it felt like to eat without fear of someone stealing it from him. The man sat across from him, watching but not pressuring, letting the boy take his time. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, the boy began to trust again. He learned the man's name. Daniel Carter, a self-made millionaire with a reputation for being ruthless in business, but oddly gentle in private. Daniel never pried into the boy's past, never forced him to speak of the pain he had endured. Instead, he gave him something more valuable, a future. Doctors were called to assess the boy's condition. The disability that had made him an outcast in the world was no longer something that defined him. It was simply a part of him. Therapists worked with patience and care, and Daniel ensured that the boy received everything he needed to thrive. But just when it seemed like life had finally given the boy a second chance, something unexpected happened. One night, as Daniel was working late in his study, he heard a noise, soft, hesitant footsteps in the hallway. He turned to see the boy standing there, clutching something tightly in his small hands. It was an old, crumpled piece of paper, worn from being folded and unfolded too many times. "What's that?" Daniel asked, setting his pen down. The boy hesitated, his fingers trembling as he held out the paper. Daniel took it, carefully smoothing it out. His sharp eyes scanned the faded writing, and as he read, a deep frown settled on his face. The words on that paper would change everything. And suddenly, Daniel realized This boy's past wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mystery. One that someone, somewhere, didn't want uncovered. Daniel's fingers tightened around the crumpled paper, his sharp eyes scanning the faded words. The ink had smudged in places, but the message was clear enough. It wasn't just a note, it was a desperate plea. Please, if you find him, keep him safe. Don't let them take him back. His heart pounded. He looked up at the boy, who was watching him with an expression Daniel had never seen before, fear, but not of him. It was something deeper, something buried in the past. Who gave this to you? Daniel asked, his voice steady but gentle. The boy swallowed hard. He opened his mouth as if to speak but hesitated. His fingers curled around the sleeves of his sweater, the fabric bunching under his grip. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "My mom." Daniel felt a strange weight settle in his chest. The boy had never spoken about his family before, never mentioned where he had come from or why he was alone on the streets. He had avoided the past like a wound too painful to touch. But now the past was coming for them. Daniel unfolded the note completely, scanning the paper again. There was no signature, no name, nothing to identify who had written it, just those haunting words. His mind raced with questions. Who was trying to take the boy back? And why? The next morning, Daniel made some calls. Money could buy a lot of things, information included. Within hours, he had a team of investigators looking into missing child reports, hospital records, anything that could give him a clue about the boy's past. Days passed, and with every piece of information that came in, the picture became clearer and darker. The boy's name was Oliver. He had been reported missing over a year ago, but the case had gone cold. His mother, a single parent, had vanished around the same time. There were no records of her after that, no trace of where she had gone. But the most disturbing part. Before she disappeared, she had been in contact with a powerful organization. Daniel's gut twisted as he read through the reports. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. This was something much bigger. One night, as Daniel sat in his study, reviewing the files, he heard a soft knock on the door. Oliver stood there, his small frame illuminated by the hallway light. "You're looking for her, aren't you?" the boy asked. Daniel set the papers down. "Yes." Oliver hesitated, then stepped inside. He walked up to the desk, his hands gripping the edge as if grounding himself. His voice was quiet but firm when he finally spoke. "She told me to run." Daniel's breath caught. Oliver's eyes glistened, his voice shaking. "I don't remember everything. Just, men came to our house. My mom was scared. She told me to hide. She said if anything happened to her, I had to run and never let them find me." He swallowed. Then I heard yelling. A crash, and she never came back. Daniel's jaw tightened. He could picture it, the fear, the chaos, a mother's last desperate attempt to save her child. And then the unshakable realization hit him. Whoever had taken Oliver's mother had likely been looking for him too. That meant they would come again. Daniel was no stranger to danger. His wealth had earned him enemies before. But this was different. This wasn't about business. This was about a boy who had already lost too much. And Daniel wasn't about to let him lose anything more. The next few days were a whirlwind of security upgrades, quiet inquiries, and careful planning. Daniel arranged for guards to patrol the estate, cameras to be installed at every entrance. He was prepared for a fight. But then the call came. It was one of his investigators. His voice was tense, urgent. "We found her." Daniel's breath hitched. "She's alive." "Yes, but you need to see this for yourself." Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his keys. He turned to Oliver, who had been sitting on the couch, watching him with wide, questioning eyes. "Come on," Daniel said. Oliver's hands clenched into fists. "Is it her?" Daniel nodded. "Let's find out." The drive was silent. Oliver sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his fingers digging into his sleeves. His eyes never left the window, as if afraid the world might change before they got there. They pulled up to a small clinic on the outskirts of the city. The building was old but clean, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly inside. Daniel stepped out first, scanning the area before motioning for Oliver to follow. The receptionist led them down a quiet hallway, her voice hushed. She was found wandering the streets a few months ago. Disoriented, she doesn't talk much. Daniel's chest tightened. And then they saw her. Sitting by the window, her hair unkempt, her eyes distant, was a woman. Her clothes were worn, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Oliver froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then in a breathless whisper, he said, "Mom?" The woman turned, her eyes locking onto the boy standing in the doorway. And in that instant, everything changed. Oliver stood frozen in the doorway, his small body trembling. His mother's eyes, dull and distant at first, slowly widened in recognition. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, like a dam breaking, tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oliver," her voice cracked, barely a whisper. Before Daniel could react, Oliver bolted forward, throwing himself into her arms. She clutched him tightly, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. Sobs racked her fragile body, and she buried her face in his hair, whispering over and over, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Daniel stood back, giving them space, but his mind was racing. This moment, mother and son reunited, should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because something still didn't add up. He stepped forward gently. "Miss Carter," he started, using her last name, hoping it would ground her. "What happened? Who were you running from?" She pulled back slightly, her shaking hands cupping Oliver's face, as if memorizing every detail. Then she looked up at Daniel, her tear-streaked face tightening with fear. "They're still looking for him," she whispered. Daniel's gut twisted. "They wanted to take him," she continued. "I never knew why. But they came to my house that night. They said he didn't belong to me." Her voice broke. "I fought. I begged. But they wouldn't listen." Oliver's hands gripped her sleeves. "Who, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, looking at Daniel as if searching for reassurance. Then, taking a deep breath, she said, "The people I used to work for." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "I was part of a program," she explained, her voice trembling. "They funded medical research, but it was never just that. They experimented, tested, used people. And when I found out what they were doing, what they were planning, I ran." She looked down at Oliver, stroking his hair. "I ran because they told me he wasn't mine, that he was theirs." A heavy silence filled the room. Daniel's chest tightened as the truth sank in. This wasn't just a case of a missing boy. Oliver wasn't just abandoned, he was being hunted. His mother continued, her voice urgent now. "They need him back. They think he's special, but I don't know why." She shook her head, her expression desperate. "I don't care what they think. He's my son." Oliver clung to her, his small hands gripping her tightly. "I don't want to go with them." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You won't," he said firmly. But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be that easy. And he was right. Because when they stepped outside the clinic, Daniel immediately sensed something was wrong. The quiet street was now lined with black SUVs. The kind that didn't belong in a neighborhood like this. The kind that meant trouble. Oliver's mother gasped, clutching him protectively. Daniel stepped in front of them, his instincts kicking in. A door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. His expression was calm, too calm. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "you have something that belongs to us." Daniel's fists clenched. "He's not a thing," he said coldly. "He's a child." The man smiled slightly, as if amused. "A very valuable child." His gaze shifted to Oliver's mother. "You should have never run. You knew we'd come for him." Oliver whimpered, gripping his mother's hand. She held him tighter, her face pale with fear. Daniel's heart pounded. He had dealt with powerful people before, but this was different. This wasn't about money or business. This was about a boy's life. And there was no way he was handing Oliver over. Keeping his voice steady, he said, "I suggest you leave." The man tilted his head, amused. Or what? Daniel didn't answer. He simply pressed a button on his phone. Within seconds, a convoy of black cars sped into the street. Armed security stepped out, forming a protective barrier around Daniel, Oliver, and his mother. The calm arrogance on the man's face finally cracked. Daniel took a step forward, his voice low but deadly. "You think you're powerful. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The man's jaw tightened. He looked at Oliver, then at Daniel, before finally exhaling sharply. "This isn't over." Without another word, he signaled to his men. One by one, the SUVs turned and disappeared into the night. Daniel watched them go, his muscles still tense. Then he turned to Oliver and his mother. "It's over," he said, his voice softer now. Oliver looked up at him, his eyes filled with something Daniel hadn't seen before: trust. A few days later, back at Daniel's estate, things finally felt peaceful. Oliver was laughing again, running through the garden with a sense of freedom he had never known before. His mother sat beside Daniel on the patio, watching him with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to." She looked at him, truly looked at him. "Why did you help him?" Daniel exhaled, watching Oliver chase a butterfly across the grass. Then, in a voice softer than usual, he said, "Because once, a long time ago, someone helped me too." She didn't press for more, and he didn't offer. Some things didn't need to be said. All that mattered was that Oliver was safe, and for the first time in a long time, he had a future. One that no one could take away from him.